Good morning, everybody. I think we are ready to start. It is a great pleasure to moderate this thematic session on carbon capture and storage technologies. My name is Iva Petrova. I'm a Deputy Minister for Energy, and I'm in this role since 2021. With me here, not on the stage, but here, soon will be with us, are esteemed and inspiring colleagues, Ms. Luciana Mio, if you can, yes, greet the audience. Luciana is head of Clean Economy Energy Policy Group. Energy Policy Group is a Bucharest-based, non-profit, independent think tank specializing in energy and climate policy, market studies, and energy strategies. Energy Policy Group was established back in 2014 with a focus on Eastern Europe and Black Sea region. Luciana is also a co-chair of the European Commission's Working Group on Public Perception of CCS Technologies. Laura Strovalde is a Deputy Director for Investment and Energy, Investment and Development Agency of Latvia. Laura's career has been dedicated to investment attraction, implementation of innovation strategies, and startup ecosystems acceleration in Latvia. And last but not least, Rosen Papazov, CEO and member of Management Board of Holcim Bulgaria. Holcim Bulgaria is part of Holcim Group. That's a worldwide leader in construction materials and innovative technologies for the construction sector, with assets in more than 70 countries all over the world. And before we start, I would like to guide you briefly on the agenda. We will have a short presentation by the three speakers, followed by a break. The break should be between 11:10 and 11:50. Then we get back together here for the panel discussion and Q&A input from the audience. We have also a digital tool, Slido, to use. The idea is to engage you in the discussions and in the exchanges. So if you can scan the image or join at slido.com and then enter the code. And we are expecting you to collaborate and to actively use the digital tool so we can interact with what is going on here. So what the session is about? The session is focused on carbon capture and storage technologies, what is their role in the green transition, how they can actually help us and enable the achievement of the decarbonization commitments on time. And here comes, if we can have open the first question in Slido, just to test your knowledge on the technologies themselves, if you can express your opinion on CCS technologies when they date back. You have an option of years there. So, the CCS technologies are key technologies to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Within the European landscape and also within the individual member states, a lot of progress has been on developing an enabling environment for these technologies. If we look, for example, at the SET plan, the carbon capture and storage, but also carbon capture and utilization technologies are recognized as an essential solution for achieving the climate goals. A lot of efforts have been put to enable the development of commercial scale CCS projects from industrial CO2 sources, as well as in the power sector and for low carbon hydrogen production. Also, a focus is the development of EU-wide cross-border CO2 infrastructure and enabling support and monitoring the process of projects of common interest. Promotion of pilot projects on promising new capture technologies, also stressing the importance of the CO2 storage in Europe is something that we see on the policy agenda. In the same time, while these developments are a fact, we also have a crucial issue to address, and this is the public perception of these technologies, which seems to be low at EU level, and especially if we look in the case of Bulgaria, even lower. And this makes a crucial the process of informing and engaging the stakeholders, citizens, businesses, institutions, when we develop the policy, but also when we structure and implement individual projects. Why it is important? Because we see also a huge concerns in the stakeholders that while we focus on CCS, maybe we will abandon other options that are available to decarbonize and to achieve the targets. And also, if you look at the European landscape, you will see quite a diversified policy attitude towards these technologies. If we look at certain countries like Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, they are leaders in developing and applying projects and technologies of scale, while, for example, other countries opted to ban the onshore CO2 storage, which is also an issue. So, if we can look at the Slido results, do we have something? Okay, I have an additional information. 1930s is actually the period when the concept for the carbon capture started. First, it was looked to enhance oil recovery processes. The first projects originate from 1950s. However, the large-scale project that we all know is from 1970, maybe. That's the Sakrok oil field developed by Chevron. And the CO2 storage was effective from 1972 up to 2009. But actually, since 1990s, is when we started to look at the CCS technologies as a decarbonization option. And now we have the first carbon capture and storage project, 1996 in Norway, for CO2 storage, Sleipner. So from this point, I will invite Luciana to further elaborate on the available EU policies, what are the developments, if you can touch upon also the Net Zero Industry Act, the forums that are there, on regional cooperation, why it is important, and why, especially in our region, this is a technology we should pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Petrova, and good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting. That's mostly what my presentation is about, to get us a bit familiarized with the EU landscape at the moment, but also for Central and Eastern Europe regarding carbon capture and storage. Just a little bit about my organization. So as Eva mentioned, I represent Energy Policy Group, or EPG. We are a think tank based in Bucharest, and we focus on energy and climate policy issues with a focus on Romania, but also more broadly in Central and Eastern Europe, and also within the EU and global contexts. As Eva mentioned, we were founded in 2014, so actually last week we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. Just a little photo of our team. We've grown substantially as our interest in industrial decarbonization and in CCS has also grown. We've had to add more and more people to our organization. I head the Clean Economy Division, so this focuses on energy-consuming sectors, primarily heavy industry, so that's steel, cement, chemicals, but also the building sector, and climate policy and governance, which is an issue that we're looking at quite closely in Romania, given the importance of national strategies and climate policies to really get technologies like CCS off the ground. On CCS, we've been working on the topic since 2021, when I joined EPG. We've been involved in 2 large-scale projects. The first one just finished at the end of last year. It was actually funded by EEA and Norway grants. It was called CCS for CEE. I'm going to take you through some of the findings a little bit later in the presentation. The second one, and this is where we also work a little bit on carbon capture and utilization, not just storage. It's a Horizon 2020 project called Consensus, which is focusing on developing innovations in carbon capture and conversion into formic acid. And we also have some smaller privately funded projects on CCS in Romania. As Eva briefly mentioned, we also co-chair a working group under the CCUS Forum. So for those of you who aren't aware, the CCUS Forum is the European Commission's stakeholder engagement platform for CCUS. It has a couple of working groups. The public perception one was also active last year. We had a lot of representatives from industry, from think tanks, from academia, from public authorities, really debating the issue of public perception of CCUS and how to increase public acceptance, which, as Eva mentioned, is still relatively low across the EU. One other thing that we're quite proud of is that the European Parliament has a framework for organizations to propose pilot projects, so pilot projects and preparatory action framework, PPPA. I would really encourage you to have a look at it. And we proposed an initiative for a watchdog on CCUS in the EU, so basically a forum whereby the EU CCUS pipeline of projects is monitored to make sure that they're all being deployed effectively, that they have significant impact on emissions, and that they're fair. Because as I'll show you in the next slide, there's still quite a big imbalance in between Northwestern Europe and Eastern Europe when it comes to CCUS. Okay, so just giving us a little bit of context on EU policy. The first thing to mention is that the whole EU policy discussion on CCUS has really been revived in the last 3 years. Prior to that, there was about a decade in which not much happened. The main directive that we have on that's relevant for CCS is the CO2 storage directive. Now, this was adopted in 2009, and what it does is it makes provisions for the safe storage of CO2 in geological formations in the EU. All member states have to abide by these provisions. After that, again, there was about 10 years in which not much happened. There was some disappointment around plans for commercial scale CCS projects being funded, and then the carbon price crashed and there was no more funding, so a lot of these projects had to be abandoned. But with the Green Deal, we now have a real revamp on CCUS, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of more projects coming online. And I just wanted to pinpoint a couple of the important policies at EU level that are relevant for CCS. The first is the Emissions Trading System Directive. So this started covering CCS in 2009. CCS is also an emitting activity, so this means that if there are leaks of CO2 or any emissions of CO2 from the process of transporting and storing CO2 underground, these are subject to the emissions trading system. So the entities involved would have to pay for those tons of CO2 that are emitted. But also, conversely, if an operator emits CO2, which it then captures, transports, and stores, it can be exempt from paying for those CO2 emissions under the ETS directive. This directive was revised in 2023, and it includes a couple of important points. The first one is that it indicates a phase out of free allowances. So free allowances are essentially free allocations of emission certificates to industrial operators that are at risk of not being able to pay for their CO2 emissions and abandoning their production in Europe and moving abroad. For example, cement, the cement industry emits a lot of CO2, which is impossible to abate because it's a process emission, and therefore it was among the sectors that was given these free allowances so they wouldn't be taxed so heavily. Now these free allowances are being phased out, and we have the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's being phased in. So by 2034, all of these sectors, steel, cement, chemicals, and others, will have to pay the full price of their CO2 emissions. And this obviously generates an increased interest in CCS, because if you have to pay for all of your emissions, you have more of a realistic business case for capturing that CO2 so you don't have to pay for it. Another important update was that CCU was included in the ETS directive. Previously it wasn't, it was just carbon capture and storage. But now, as an operator, if you capture your CO2, transport it and utilize it for something, you can also be exempt from paying for that CO2. But the CO2 has to be permanently chemically bound in a product. It can't be, for example, used to produce a fuel, because when you burn that fuel, the CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. Another really big policy piece that you will see a lot being talked about is the Net Zero Industry Act. So this was adopted actually relatively recently, and it makes a couple of important provisions, but I'll focus on one in particular. It says that by 2030, across the EU, we need to have 50 million tons of annual injection capacity for CO2 to be stored underground. What it also does, it says, is that this capacity has to be made ready by oil and gas producers. So depending on how much oil and gas was produced by each of these entities of oil and gas producers, they have to contribute proportionally the same amount of CO2 storage and make it available. And I'm just giving a couple of examples here. They're from a presentation I did where we were looking at 3 particular countries. But for example, Denmark, oil and gas producers will need to make available 5.5 million tons. Greece is very little because there's not much oil and gas production, around 0.07. Romania will have about 9. So it will be the second highest amount of CO2 storage in the EU that needs to be developed. This will obviously be challenging because CCS is not very advanced in some parts of Europe. So if you look at the project pipeline in the map on the right-hand side, most of it is clustered around northwestern Europe. And that's obvious. You know, the North Sea, as Eva mentioned, was one of the first storage sites that was exploited by Norway. We now have projects coming online from the UK, from the Netherlands, transport from Germany to the North Sea. Also France is getting involved. But when you look at sort of Eastern Europe, the projects are much more rare. We essentially in Southeastern Europe have Bulgaria. We have a couple of projects in Greece as well. Croatia, definitely one to watch with projects coming online, and Poland. But you can see that there is a relatively big gap. And this is one of the things that makes it really important to talk about this in Central and Eastern Europe. The Net Zero Industry Act also makes an important provision, which we were talking about a little bit earlier. It's very difficult to assess the potential for CCS projects when you don't have data. So member states now must provide data. They must map the projects that they have. They must map their CO2 storage capacity and inform the European Commission about that. And if they don't have any CCS that they're looking at or that they're doing, they have to explain why. And they have to say what alternative technologies are going to use to reduce industrial emissions. Another piece of important policy is the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy. So this was adopted in February. Now, it's a communication, so it doesn't have a legal effect, but it's quite an important document because it sets a direction for CCUS that was really missing at EU level. It sets an aspirational target of 250 million tons per year injection capacity, but this is in the EEA, so Norway will definitely distort that. But it's still quite a significant amount to reach by 2040. One interesting thing is that after 2030, the strategy really sees an increased role of direct air capture and bioenergy with carbon capture. So this is very much getting into the negative emissions territory. Some other things that the strategy looks towards are things that we've been waiting for a long time, which is about CO2 transport in the EU. So the Commission is going to come out with a regulatory package on CO2 transport and also with some minimum standards for CO2 transport. And there's also a working group within the CCUS forum that's going to be looking at this. Additionally, the Commission will have to propose a planning mechanism for infrastructure to be able to really get towards this pan-European network of cross-border CO2 transport. There are also going to be some guidelines for safe transport of CO2 by ship in partnership with the International Maritime Organization. And again, touching on public perception, the strategy doesn't really do much on this, but it does highlight that public engagement will be very important and that the Commission will seek to work with member states to increase awareness and information on CCS. Okay. What about Central and Eastern Europe? You've already seen that there's a little bit of an imbalance between Northwest and Eastern Europe. So I'm just going to take you through some findings of the CCS for CE project, where we covered 11 countries in Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, Bulgaria was not one of them. And we assessed the status quo. Where are these countries right now with regards to CCS? And what are the roadmaps, the steps that they need to follow to actually get to a solid CCS pipeline? The first thing that's kind of obvious for all of us is that CO2 emissions have decreased in all these countries since 1990. However, they're still above the EU average. And these countries have a high reliance on fossil fuels, and they have a high economic reliance on industry, more so than Western Europe. So industries like cement and steel contribute more to the gross value added of these countries than in Western Europe, which means that the risk of these industries not being able to cope with carbon prices and needing to close is much more significant for other countries in Western Europe. Because these industries contribute so much to the economy, there is a higher share of hard-to-abate CO2 emissions in the national emissions of these countries as well. Just a couple of examples, the cement sector, that's a big driver of these hard-to-abate emissions that these countries will need to reduce. Metallurgy, steel production in Ukraine is a really, really big one. The emissions from steel production in Ukraine are over half of all those in the entire EU. And another example is the Lithuanian chemical sector, where because of the presence of big chemicals producers and their contribution to the economy, we have, again, these emitters that will need carbon capture to decarbonize. The map on the right-hand side is the emitters in these countries that emit more than 1 million ton of CO2 per year. Most of them are power plants. So a lot of them are coal. And as we're phasing out coal in most of these countries, many of them would no longer be on this map after 2030. But about a third of them are industry. The largest is the steel plant in Košice in Slovakia, and the second largest, Liberty Galați, also steel production in Romania. So there are quite a lot of opportunities in Central and Eastern Europe for emitters that need to capture their emissions and to store them somewhere. Where? Possibly also in these countries. I should point out that this map is theoretical estimates. So these will likely be overestimations of the amount of storage capacity these countries actually have, but they're a good sort of benchmark to start working down from. We have potentially significant storage capacity in Ukraine, especially in the eastern region, in Romania and in Poland. There are other countries which have negligible storage capacity, like Estonia. The geology simply doesn't permit subsurface storage of CO2 onshore. So here we also need to start talking about transporting to other countries and storing on other countries' territories. Okay, this is just a zoom in of the figure that I showed in the first slide, so you can actually see some of the projects, not many, but some, that we have in Eastern Europe. So obviously the project pipeline is still quite far behind Northwestern Europe, but in recent years we've had some very exciting announcements, not just by the countries we covered in this project, but also by Italy, which is relevant for Croatia, the Ravenna hub in the northern Mediterranean Sea, and also Greece with the Pyrenees Basin, which may be relevant for Bulgaria if CO2 transport to Greece is considered possible. Poland and Croatia do have the highest number of CCS projects that have been announced, but overall, in all these countries, the policy environment is lagging behind, and the regulatory framework really isn't up to date. Now, this map is slightly out of date because Poland has lifted restrictions on onshore CO2 storage, but you'll see that there are some countries where CO2 storage simply isn't allowed. You've got Slovenia, Latvia, and Lithuania, where onshore CO2 storage is prohibited. The Ukraine doesn't really have a regulatory framework or a specific ban, but it's very unclear whether this would be allowed or not. And some other countries have restrictions. When we did this project and we interviewed stakeholders across these countries, they did say that one of the primary barriers was the lack of policy engagement, the lack of a regulatory framework, but also that links very much into financing because CCS is still expensive. And it's not just expensive because of the upfront cost, the capital cost of the equipment, but also operationally, you have an energy penalty for capturing. So we do need to also consider the cost that will accumulate over the lifetime of a capture project. Public support is also another one, and I just wanted to maybe dive into this a little bit, and we'll do, I think, more of that in the panel discussion. But it starts from the fact that overall there's a lack of knowledge about CCS, and you might say, right, well, okay, that's something that we can solve by increasing information, increasing awareness, and so on. It's a bit tricky because if there is a lack of knowledge about something, it means that public opinion is susceptible also to misinformation. And we're starting to see that already with media narratives around CO2 storage and how dangerous it is, kind of starting to contaminate the public opinion. And it will be more and more difficult to counteract that, especially because we already have a history of opposition towards some subsurface exploitation projects like gold mining, like fracking, and even CCS itself. So there was an attempt to do CCS at the Bełchatów power plant in Poland, which was abandoned because of social resistance. So we shouldn't discount the fact that the public may actually pose a barrier down the line. Even if we get the regulation right, the financing right, social opinion might pose a barrier as well. There's also issues with mistrust of the government and industrial actors in some of these countries, being that they would be the main actors that would have to promote CCS. This could again pose issues. So all of the stakeholders really highlighted how important it is to engage the public and to ensure that social acceptance doesn't become a barrier to CCS projects in the future. Once we'd identified these barriers and done an assessment of the status quo in these countries, we developed some roadmaps. And obviously there's 11 countries, I won't go through all of them, but there were a lot of commonalities between what these countries need to do to get CCS off the ground. The first one is that we need carrots, right? So we have sticks now, we have the phase out of free allowances, we have the Net Zero Industry Act, so we have obligations on emitters that makes it a little bit more reasonable to think about CCS right now. And we have a direction from the Industrial industrial carbon management strategy. But we still need carrots because, again, CCS is expensive and it's quite uncertain in terms of its returns. This would imply, firstly, the revision of the regulatory framework. So in many of these countries, the regulatory framework is not actually up to date, and it cannot cope with CO2 transport and storage to the scale that is needed. That's in terms of permitting. Also, policy attention needs to increase, so we need more mentions of CCS in national climate strategies to sort of have that political certainty. Financial steps, so using ETS funding to support carbon capture projects and increase in participation in the Innovation Fund from Central and Eastern European countries, but also more sort of innovative models for financing, like carbon contracts for difference could be a solution. We need infrastructure. So this is a really big one for CO2 transport. The state needs to be involved in infrastructure planning. So we need a master plan for CO2 transport in these countries, including cross-border transport. I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I'm seeing the timeline, but I think this presentation will be available afterwards as well. Planning, so we need to reduce the time that it takes to actually obtain a permit for CO2 storage, and we need to increase administrative capacity to deal with many projects coming online, possibly at once. And finally, the social aspects, which I think I've already mentioned, and we'll go into a little bit more in the panel discussion. One thing that I wanted to finish on is the role of regional cooperation. So it was mentioned in some of the sessions yesterday that we do need to cooperate and to put our minds and our money together when it comes to technologies like this in Central and Eastern Europe. So because we have all of these similarities in Central and Eastern European countries, there really is potential for a regional approach. We have the possibility of industrial clusters connecting through cross-border CO2 transport. We have the Black Sea as a common resource between Romania and Bulgaria, so looking at offshore CO2 storage shared between the two countries could also be an option. We also have a lot of research and knowledge in the academic environments of these countries. So there's already platforms for knowledge exchange which can be further strengthened, and common projects on the feasibility of CCS in Central and Eastern Europe could be furthered. We have some examples of hints of cooperation in terms of infrastructure. There was a memorandum of understanding signed 2 years ago between the transmission system operators for gas between Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. This included exploring regional CO2 transport. I haven't heard any updates from that, so I'm not sure where it's gone, but it is an example of something that could trigger thinking about regional CCS in Central and Eastern Europe. And we have some cross-border projects as well, so projects of common interest involving Croatia, Hungary, also Poland and the Baltic states. So these are, again, opportunities for countries to come together on cross-border CCS projects. There are some barriers, though. We have the London Protocol. This is a global convention on management of waste dumping at sea. And up until 2009, it included CO2. There was then an amendment, but it hasn't been fully ratified. So officially, as per the London Protocol, CO2 transport to another country for offshore storage is not allowed. And the way that countries need to overcome this is by signing bilateral agreements with each other to say, in this case, it's okay, we allow it, as Norway has done with the Netherlands. But that's obviously still a restriction. And another one to mention is the Helsinki Convention, which outright prohibits CO2 storage offshore in the Baltic Sea. And Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are all signatories to that. So the Baltic Sea will be a bit of an issue if we want to think about offshore CO2 storage there. We need to map regional storage potential, so not just thinking about borders, but there are obviously geological formations that cross multiple countries. How do we deal with those? How can we have a common storage infrastructure for Central and Eastern Europe? We also need to harmonize our national legislation to ensure that what's allowed in one country is not prohibited in the other, and we're not creating these conflicts. And we need to increase the absorption of EU funding for cross-border projects. So more projects of common interest, more projects of mutual interest to involve countries outside the EU as well would be a real boost to regional cooperation. I think I'll leave it at that, and I think I still have 2 minutes if there's any immediate questions. Can we have... Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana, for the very interesting and in-depth presentation and contribution to the topic. I believe now we can rely on Laura just to present how the governments actually could foster the CCS projects from perspective of investors and local companies, how the CCS looks as a totally new sector in terms of investments, how the companies can benefit, how companies and entrepreneurs deal with the existing and coming regulations, and also to share with us the good examples and plans in Latvia for companies, forerunners, how they cooperate with scientific institutions, and so on. Laura, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today on this stage. I will speak on the role of carbon capture and storage in Latvia. And since I'm responsible for the investment and energy at the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia, my perspective is from economic aspects, and I will show what kind of comparative advantages Latvia holds and how we utilize or don't those advantages. But first things first. In Latvia, we are proud to be among leaders in the EU for the share of renewable energy. And we have been the forerunners of this for quite a long time, thanks to our hydro. However, that is also one of the reasons why there haven't been more incentives or activities on the political level to do even more towards the Green Deal until the war in Ukraine. Now things have finally changed, and there are some activities towards that Green Deal and other aspects we need to reach. You already saw in the previous presentation, unlike many regions, we do hold a potential for onshore and offshore CO2 storage, being the only one of the Baltic countries where prospects for carbon dioxide storage in natural underground structures have been localized. According to seismological research and evaluation, there are 15 onshore sites for potential CO2 storage, here marked in the orange. In light green, bluish, there are areas with the largest carbon footprint currently in Latvia. So in that aspect, those potential sites for CO2 storage are very strategically located quite near to those large emitters. The estimated capacity for those 15 sites is about 400 million tons of carbon storage, thanks to our deep saline aquifers we have. When we talk about the offshore, in addition to those 15 sites, there are also two offshore sites localized with potential of 170 million tons. But as you already heard, there are international agreements that prohibit us to utilize those two sites. However, this of course opens up a potential for regional CO2 storage solutions, both onshore and offshore. There are legal hurdles and challenges that needs to be overcome to fully utilize these opportunities. The existing climate law in Latvia prescribes carbon capture, transportation and storage. However, the storage is currently prohibited on an industrial level, and injections only for the research purposes are allowed. This ban was imposed due to the absence of detailed assessment of the suitability of those structures for safe storage. And of course, the public perception and concerns also played an important role in this ban. Currently, the Ministry of Climate and Energy are carrying out a feasibility study for that potential, and the amendments for the climate law are under discussions. But there is still a long way to go when we really will have an opportunity to store CO2 in those 15 onshore sites at least. One of the examples how to really tackle those challenges is, from our perspective, the hydrogen, where there's also a lot of biases and a lot of concerns in the public what such a new sector can bring. And here, through the several investment projects, both from local and foreign companies, where the actual hydrogen value chain was formed, that also pushed the government to really develop this new sector and to move forward with this. So I think we could also use this example how to move forward with carbon capture and storage solutions there. We do have an experience actually with safe storage through our Inčukalns natural gas facility, where natural gas is being pumped in constantly on quite high volumes. And this experience can be leveraged for developing CO2 storage infrastructure in Latvia. When we talk about large-scale projects, one has to remember that forming a cross-border project can sometimes really be one of the most effective ways how to move forward, since the carbon capture requires a huge amount of investment and political will to move forward. We have one specific offshore wind park project we are developing together with Estonia. And this project is very complicated due to many reasons, both also the public perception is involved, the political decisions, the investment, but through such cross-border projects, the things can really be moved towards the initial goal that has been set among several countries, because it involves not only one national decisions on a national level, but also involves other countries. And great example currently in Latvia is the CCS Baltic Consortium project. The project between Latvia and Lithuania, developed from two companies, two cement plants, one in Latvia, Švenk, and the other in Lithuania, Akmenis, where the primary goal is to significantly reduce CO2 emissions from both those plants located in those two countries. And also within this project, the developers aim to actually develop the currently non-existing CO2 value chain, because one thing is to find the right technology to capture the CO2, another thing is how and where to transport it and where to store it. And in this project, there are also involved the transport companies, ports, and potential storage holders. Since I already mentioned that in Latvia, although we have those 15 sites with potential CO2 storage opportunities, currently, since it's prohibited, with this particular project, the project developers are planning to transport that captured CO2 to another site where it can be stored, actually. The estimated investment needed for such project is up to 3 billion euros, according to the existing calculations. And what the project developers aim since this is a cross-border project, they can apply for EU funding. This project has already been included in projects of common interest, so this allows to apply for CEF funding for the infrastructure, since the infrastructure is approximately 60-70% of all those expenses is the infrastructure. The pipelines, the current plan is to transport it by rail, but that's not a long-term solution. So the project implementers are looking at the pipeline solution, and then there is the ports and what kind of infrastructure is required for ports to be able to carry that CO2, and then of course the storage aspects. So that altogether requires a huge amount of money, but the project developers are really keen on moving forward with this, and currently they are carrying out the feasibility studies with the involved parties, how the best to move forward, and they are planning to apply for the funding in the nearest future. And they aim that the project is to commence operations by 2030. So it's quite tight, but as you already heard, those legislations on the EU level don't allow for the companies to think for several more years. They have to really start acting now, otherwise basically the business will lose its comparative advantage to do anything. And the company, the cement plant operator in Latvia, Schwenk, which is the leading party to develop this CCS Baltic Consortium project, is one of the top emitters in Latvia. And of course, that's the reason why such a project is being developed. With CCS Baltic Consortium project, they aim to capture almost 90% of all the CO2 that is being emitted from that particular cement plant. They are still searching for the best or the most appropriate technology, how to capture that CO2, looking at end-of-pipe technology. The total investment is calculated to be approximately 400 million euros. So just for the capturing is several hundreds of millions of euros, and then comes the transport and storage, which in the end is up to 3 billion euros. And of course, such a project will contribute to the EU's Green Deal project in the whole region. And we, as an investment and development agency, do facilitate innovation and new technologies in decarbonization through several R&D projects where we provide both grants from the EU and also specific programs to help those companies to really succeed in these projects. One is large investment loans project with capital discount. This is specifically project funded by the budget funding for projects starting with 10 million euros, so quite large-scale investment projects that are developing some new technologies or new products. And extra points are given to those that comply with the decarbonization activities and regulation. Another example is the Green Channel for investment. Both local and foreign companies can apply to actually have a fast track for all the procedures the company needs when building a new infrastructure or changing something that requires investments in infrastructure and to get all those approvals from the governmental institutions. And this Green Channel is being provided specifically only for those companies that comply with the with the Green Deal, with the decarbonization, and with those sectors that are value-added sectors and important for the country's economy. So basically, if the company is approved to get that green channel or fast track, all the procedures and all the approvals company can get twice as fast as in normal procedure. So that's also a very good instrument when we talk with the companies. So these are the instruments we as an agency have, but of course when it comes to political decisions, there is a lot of work to be done to really get those projects going, because one thing is investment and the other one is those legal hurdles that companies have to overcome with. And there are several examples of startups and companies that already do work towards the Green Deal. One example is Hyrogas, that's developed technology to produce synthetic gas by recycling biomass and waste, and that where the CO2 can be separated in the production process. Another one is S+, the representative you heard also yesterday in the panel discussion, working with the heat recovery technology. And another one is AB Labs, a great company that develops solutions for heavy-duty vehicles, because when it comes to the Green Deal, it's not only about the carbon from those large emitters, but also from other sectors. And the last one is the Primex, concrete manufacturer, that is looking also from another perspective, not only how to capture that CO2 emitted, but actually how to also limit or minimize the carbon footprint by using less of that material that is responsible for those huge emissions. So this is also another aspect how the companies are looking at their carbon footprint and their competitiveness. All those companies we are supporting by different support mechanisms, both from the EU funding and from those large investment projects, which is very important for us to really get going. And sometimes if the push from the companies and from the investors is intensive enough, then also those legal hurdles can be overcome more easily, as our experience shows. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We also have good examples of work done on CCS in Bulgaria. For example, the Sofia University, together with the Danish Institute of Geology and Clean Air Task Force, already implemented 2 projects for mapping of possible CO2 storage sites. We also have the University of Mining and Geology that looked specifically for the potential of CO2 storage in Maritsa East complex. That's, the area in Bulgaria where the largest thermal power plants and lignite mines are located. And also we have private initiative and investments. We have the pleasure to have Rosen with us. He will share the Holcim Bulgaria's road to net zero and the perspective of the private sector. They have a project, Belly Net Zero, with targeting capacity of 600,000 tons per year at 2,500 meters depth, possibly. But before Rosen starts, if I can ask you also to look at the Slido and give a contribution on the second question. The question is for the public perception. Please be fair, be open when you vote, because this is the first topic that we will start with during the panel discussion later. Rosen, please.
Thank you very much, Eva. And good morning, everyone. In my presentation, I would covered the perspective of an industry, and an industry that is quite significantly affected by carbon capture, emissions, and dealing with those. And so this industry is construction industry, and I will start initially giving you a little bit of a glimpse of what construction industry faces as challenges and what opportunities also lie there. Why it is important to talk about carbon capture and what is the role of construction industry in carbon management. First of all, the population growth worldwide is rapidly developing, and the forecast is that it will reach 10 billion by 2050. And at the same time, the urbanization is growing rapidly. Approximately 2.5 billion people are expected to move to big city by 2050. Now, if you think for a while, what is the implication of all this? It means that the world will build a city with the size of New York every single month between now and 2050. You understand that there are several challenges in that, but the immediate ones that are obvious is that, first of all, from resource perspective, if we continue with the linear economy, we would need somewhere between 2 and 3 planets between now and 2050 to be able to build all that. And the second one is the carbon footprint, or the topic of CO2 that it entails. Construction industry per se is responsible for about 38% of global carbon emissions, and about a third of that is the so-called embedded emissions, or the emissions that are done to build, whether it's a building or a road or an infrastructure project. And the remaining 2/3 are emitted in the process of using this building. And so, turning the topic in terms of construction materials, the dilemma is pretty obvious. We need to solve how are we going to build everything that is about to be built to cater for the necessity of population and urbanization, and at the same time how to do it in an environmental friendly manner, not emitting or saving the CO2 on the part of construction which is the so-called embedded emissions. And here comes Holcim as the biggest worldwide provider of innovative and sustainable construction materials. We are present in more than 70 countries worldwide, and what is important is that Holcim was the first company in its sector that has undertaken a concrete net zero target for 2050 with a roadmap, 2050, with a roadmap until 2030 that is verified by SBTi and is measured quite strictly in terms of progress on annual basis. The group is number one in R&D in the industry. We have 5 global R&D hubs, and we are collaborating actively with universities worldwide, as well as with open innovation startup ecosystem. And all that leads to the fact that currently we are in a possession of more than 300 patents in respect of green construction and various materials and methods to get there. So what is the approach of Holcim in respect of decarbonization of construction? First of all, we are utilizing alternative raw materials and alternative fuels, which are waste for some other industries, in order to address exactly the circularity topic that I mentioned about. So we are absorbing a lot of waste generated by others that help us, first of all, to have circular solutions, and then to reduce the carbon footprint of the products that we can offer to the construction industry. Of course, we are deploying what we call plants of tomorrow technologies, which with various digital tools allow us to be energy efficient among many other things. And also, in the last couple of years, we have expanded significantly in what we call products and solutions, like, for example, insulation or green roofing, solutions that enable decarbonizing cities. Now, to make it a bit more concrete, and also to put it in the context of Holcim in Bulgaria, like I said, we do significant efforts in order to reduce both our footprint in terms of carbon and also to enable circularity by using secondary raw materials and fuels. In this respect, in Bulgaria, for example, we are already reaching 90% of substitution of traditional fuels with alternative ones, mainly being RDF, and again, solving another problem of waste collection and generation. And then we utilize secondary raw materials in order to reduce the footprint of our products. Among those secondary raw materials, there is what we call construction and demolition materials, or this is demolition waste that we are collecting, processing, and then utilizing to replace limestone, which is the main raw material used to produce cement. And here comes the specific, because I'm going into the topic of carbon capture, but the specific of cement industry is that the carbon footprint of the industry has two parts. One is what we call fuel component, and the other is what we call process component. Now, the fuel component obviously comes from the type of fuel that we utilize for production. And here, as I mentioned, the steps that we are taking in diversifying the fuels from traditional to alternative ones help a lot in reducing the carbon footprint. However, on the process side, the carbon is emitted in the process of decarbonization of limestone in the clinker kiln, which as a chemical process produces CO2. And as long as cement is produced from limestone, this is unavoidable. And this is why we are discussing or considering cement one of the hard-to-abate industries, simply because there is no replacement of cement, and at the same time, we have to use limestone to produce cement, or to decarbonize limestone to use cement, which inevitably produces CO2. And here comes the topic that no matter what we do or how strongly we work on reduction of CO2 with conventional and innovative methods, and that's exactly what Eva said at the beginning, there is a part which still remains and needs to be captured, transported, and stored if we want to reach the net zero. What we currently do, of course, is super important, because I can proudly say that our plant in Bulgaria is among the leaders in the world in terms of carbon footprint per ton of clinker, and this allows us to offer already today products to construction industry which are between 30 and 50%, with 30 to 50% reduced carbon footprint. The cement that we call EcoPlanet, and ready-mix concrete that we call EcoPact, and we have a number of landmark projects already built both in Bulgaria and worldwide with those products with reduced carbon footprint. But again, the final step, if we want to get to the net zero, is carbon capture, transportation, and storage. And in this respect, Holcim already has 17 flagship projects, which are pretty much all over the world, of course, with a big focus on Europe. And so far, we have 6 financed projects by the European Innovation Fund. And from this perspective, we are leaders in our industry. And this year we have submitted a Bulgarian project, which is called Belly Net Zero. I will come back to this in a while. But what I want to highlight here is 2 things. First of all, that these carbon capture and storage projects are extremely complex. My co-panelists already discussed about the challenges from a regulatory perspective, from stakeholder management perspective, but also from financial perspective. We speak about projects that are order of magnitude of several hundreds of millions of euros, so 300 to 500 million euro, which is a huge investment. And as Eva mentioned earlier, the return is not very obvious at this point in time. And so the fact that a company like Holcim is committed to executing those projects is a clear demonstration about the long-term horizon that we are taking, and of course the fact that we are seeing our role and accepting our role in this process. Now, I'll go to Bulgaria to make it a little bit more concrete and say a few words about what we intend to do in Bulgaria. The strategy that we have adopted for our obvious advantage or disadvantage, the geographical position that we have is not close to water, which means that for us, offshore CCS is hardly an option. Therefore, what we have done is we have focused our attention to the northwest of Bulgaria, and we have procured a study that has shown that from geological perspective, we do have an opportunity to develop not one, but several carbon storage sites. And this can be done in steps, in a phased approach. The way in which we have defined our strategy is that our capture, transportation, and storage would be in the vicinity of our plant. And from strategic point of view, this would also allow to use the storage sites not only for Holcim, but for other emitters, certainly in northwest Bulgaria, but also in Eastern Europe or further away, because our plant is connected to Vidin, which is the bridge connecting Bulgaria and Romania, and also we support on the Danube River through a rail line, which is in process of being renovated, and it's approximately 100 kilometers away. So developing a storage site or sites in northwest Bulgaria will certainly give an opportunity for local but also regional carbon storage solution. And again, to go a little bit deeper and speak about specific projects that we have defined and are in process of executing. The northwest of Bulgaria itself, among different industries, today is emitting about 100 million tons of, about a million tons of CO2, sorry, per year. But also, like I said, but the potential storage site or the phases in which it can be developed is between 50 and 100 million, which is quite significant opportunity for the years ahead. And so the initial project that we have launched is called Eastern Lights. It is linked to the development of the storage site. We have won Horizon Europe project with 20 million euro financing in order to develop the first storage site. So we are launching the project this year. And it will take about 2 to 3 years in order to, first of all, to make all the works that are necessary to prove the capacity of the storage. And then the next project that we have just filed a month ago is called Belly Net Zero. And the idea is that this is the first fully integrated capture, transportation, and onshore storage project. We are looking to be successful with the current call of the Innovation Fund. And with this, in the next 5 years, we hope to be the first net zero onshore cement plant producing zero carbon footprint products for the construction industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosen. Well, I just lost track of time with all these interesting presentations. I don't know if we have a minute or two just for for a quick feedback from the audience. If you have any immediate reactions, if you would like to share something at the point where we are with the exchanges. Okay, maybe it's time for a break, and then we start again 11:50. Thank you.